We knew that the patient needed a trauma surgeon and he needed it right then and there.
I was in Orange Beach with my family whenever I got a phone call from one of the residents, and they sent me some pictures of what was going on, and my first impression was like, wow, this one's bad.
I knew at that point, if this experienced surgeon had come back into the room to say that it was an unusual incident.
There's no explanation, but God is good. I mean, that's simply what it is.
I was born in Crowley, Louisiana, graduated from UL in 1989 in mechanical engineering. I couldn't find jobs that I wanted in engineering, so I ended up buying dry cleaners in Crowley.
Shortly after we met, we started talking about different interests and likes, and he looked like the type of guy that probably sat around and watched TV. He's a dry cleaner. Nothing too exciting there.
I'm a skydiver, avid skydiver. I have 315 jumps.
I realized he did have a very adventurous side. He loved jumping out of planes and skydiving. So there is that complete reverse personality that I saw eventually come out.
I wasn't able to skydive very much, and that's when I started looking at paramotoring. I had a guy from Brewer that met me in Crowley, and he took his paramotor up and said, well, I need to learn how to do that.
I found out about the paramotoring after he purchased the rig, and lo and behold, he started doing more and more of it, and I saw the passion that he felt about the sport, so I didn't want to hold him back from something that he would enjoy, so I was all for it. I was at home, and Miles left very early to get to Gulfport, so he kissed me goodbye and said, I'll see you later this evening.
A parasailing accident has landed a Louisiana man in the hospital. It happened just before 11 this morning in Pass Christian. Officials say the man fell out of the sky while using a paramotor.
His boys were at a baseball game, and they called me and told me that Miles had been in an accident, but it wasn't serious. He just broke his leg.
He had a thoracic aortic injury, I believe which was one of the most significant things. He had some orthopedic injuries as well, but the aorta injury, which is your main blood vessel that comes off of your heart, was the biggest injury I remember. So the hospital staff over there contacted our ER, and then we worked on getting a transfer set up.
I received a phone call from the ER at Gulfport Memorial, and the nurse was kind enough to tell me it's a little more serious than we had originally discovered. And between, I guess, Baton Rouge and Gulfport is when the nurse said, you need to get here as soon as possible. I went from girlfriend / normal person to caretaker, and I had to focus on getting to him and making sure I got there in one piece so I could distribute information to other people, because everyone else at home thought he had a broken leg. So I just completely went into caretaker mode. The rest of the drive was basically a blur.
Time for Mr. Franks was very critical in getting him to our facility where we have the cardiovascular thoracic surgeons to repair that aorta was a significant thing that had to be accomplished.
We arrived at Gulfport Memorial Hospital. We talked to the ER physician and the staff. They expressed the concern for his low blood pressure. They were giving blood, and they advised us to give 2 more units en route. We didn't want his blood pressure to be too high, where we're actually pushing more blood out of the aortic dissection and his internal injuries, but we definitely didn't want his blood pressure to drop too low where he could end up going into shock. Before we arrive here at USA, we call a report in over the radio. We let them know, hey, we're 10 minutes from your pad, and they meet us outside.
The trauma center is run by the trauma surgeons, And when a patient comes into the door, the initial evaluation is done by the trauma surgeons in conjunction with the trauma staff and ER staff, and they are essentially the quarterback of the situation. So depending on what's injured, different types of physicians may be necessary, whether it's the trauma surgeons themselves or neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, sometimes interventional radiology. And so the trauma surgeons are the ones who are triaging the injuries and then determining what order is most important, who needs to go first, and where does the patient need to go.
I got a call from the university that said they had a man that fell out of the sky and he had a blunt traumatic injury of the aorta. When you get that call, there's no time to look in a book. You have to be immediately prepared and know what you're going to do and have a plan. The interesting thing about him was, and I'd never seen this before, he had actually ruptured his aorta in 2 different spots. The most common place for rupture is proximal descending aorta, which he had that, but he also had a second rupture in the abdominal aorta. People who have that, 85% of them die at the scene. We took him immediately from the emergency room where he was in the trauma bay. He went directly to the operating room. We had to mobilize a vascular team and fix that. And luckily now we can fix those injuries endovascular. So we used endovascular techniques and were able to fix it. And really the surgery probably only took about an hour and a half to fix both aortas. It was really relatively quick.
After the surgery, Dr. Maltese came around the corner, and you guys know Dr. Maltese. He's an expert, of course, in his field, and he's very serious, and he told me exactly what happened during the surgery, and I understand the medical terminology, so I knew how serious it was, of course. And he walked out of the waiting room and then came back and leaned in the door. He said, "What was that guy doing anyway?" So he knew that it was an unusual injury, and an unusual accident. So I explained to him. He said, "Well, he's lucky to be alive." And I said, "Thank you very much. Thank you for, explaining." But I knew at that point, if this experienced surgeon had come back into the room to say that it was an unusual incident.
I was in Orange Beach with my family whenever I got a phone call from one of the residents, and they sent me some pictures of what was going on, and my first impression was like, wow, this one's bad. And they told me what was going on, that he was going to the operating room with Dr. Maltese to have some procedures done because we have to prioritize the injuries. We have to follow him from a physiologic standpoint, and what I mean by that is how are his vital signs looking? Is his blood pressure good? Heart rate good? Is he responding to the therapy that he's getting? And once he has responded appropriately, that's where we come in and we fix the musculoskeletal injuries. So he had a femur fracture that was quite complex femur fracture. There's a wide variety. Some are simple to treat, other ones are complex. He had one that was more on the complex spectrum because it was in multiple fragments, and it was up towards the hip that it was broken as well. We put a rod in the femur. That rod goes from up near the hip all the way down to just above the knee. It goes on the inside of the bone. The pelvic injury was complex as well. We don't see a lot of this type of injury, and it's called spinal pelvic dissociation. So that is where the spine, it attaches to the pelvis via a bone called the sacrum. And when he landed, the spine bent over and it broke the sacrum. So effectively his spinal column was detached from his lower extremities. The decision was made to use a smaller incision approach and not do the bigger surgery, which would be fusing his spine to his pelvis. And the treatment we chose on was putting 2 screws in the back of his pelvis in order to stabilize the fracture.
Dr. Brewer came into the waiting room after the orthopedic surgeries and said, I must be honest, I need to tell you what to be prepared for. There could be the injuries could stop him from walking for quite some time. There could be loss of bowel or bladder. There's other issues that go along with just the orthopedic surgeries as well. But he was very good at sitting down and discussing it with us and relaying that information to us in a way that we can understand.
Don't remember the accident at all. The only thing I remember is waking up. I was on my back, and they said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Why? It felt like I'd just woken up from a nap. I knew there could be potential accidents, but I never thought I would be in an accident,
I didn't know what I was going to see when I walked in, so I was trying to prepare myself mentally. I walked in the back room, and the nurses showed me the way, and he was very pale, and I could see his toes hanging out of the end of the sheets. I don't know why that stands out, but he has Fred Flintstone feet, so I could tell that was him right away. Very somber, of course, and the first thing he said to me was, "I'm sorry." I just placed my hand on his chest and I said, "I love you," and he said, "I love you too." Following the orthopedic surgery with Dr. Brewer, we knew that there was a problem with the spleen.
His original CT or his original CAT scan did not show that he had an injury to his spleen, so he had other injuries which were addressed appropriately. One of the surgical teams who was following him wanted to get a follow-up CAT scan just to make sure that everything was looking appropriate and that there wasn't going to be any need for further intervention, and they incidentally noted that his spleen looked like it was bleeding on that subsequent CAT scan. And what they noticed was that the blood count started to slowly drop, indicating that the bleed is probably significant enough that some kind of intervention is warranted.
Naturally, I was worried about the surgeries because it was multiple surgeries, and also in combination with the aortic surgeries, he's already had so much bleeding and so much repair already that I was worried that his body and his system would be having a hard time handling it all. But he's very strong, and there's a reason all the stars aligned, and we were in the right place at the right time for him to get the treatment he needed.
In this case, they were able to get really deep into the spleen, find the specific artery that was causing the bleeding. They injected the appropriate materials, and they really, because they were able to get so far, I would say probably over 90% of the rest of the spleen was completely unaffected by the procedure, and then he had no more bleeding afterwards.
Every other day or so, the nurses and doctors, of course, would give us updates and reports, which was wonderful. However, I think they could all appreciate that Miles made it through and was recovering and making even baby steps into the right direction, because each and every one of them said, "He's lucky to be alive." They would give the report, and before they left the room, they'd say, "He's lucky to be alive." Towards the end, I was kind of tired of hearing it because it's, okay, we've gotten past that. But it also makes you appreciate that these people see these traumas on a daily basis. We're taking this for granted. This is just one life and one family. But these people have to see this every day, and sometimes they have to see the other side of it, unfortunately. So they are happy, and they were sharing that. He's lucky to be here. He's lucky to still be here and be alive.
After the surgery, I couldn't even pick my leg up off the bed.
His boys arrived at the hospital, and his brother Kevin.
My oldest twin, John Thomas, he was the most involved in my recovery. One of my sons and Michelle were there just about every day.
He was in a very dark place during those first few weeks. We wondered, how is this adventurous guy gonna handle not being able to walk?
When he first came in, we were transferring him from the bed to the wheelchair with a slide board. As his therapy progressed and he started making gains in his strength, he was able to transfer himself. Just getting out of bed, on his own for the first time was, I think a real big turning point. And, him saying, I can do this. I can get better from this.
I finally was able to get up on a walker and walk down the hall with the walker. That's the first time I got up and actually walked.
Once his therapy time was over, sometimes he would stay and do a little extra, and I think that was just the key. You know, just to staying positive, staying motivated, and the support system. His family being there, his sons being there, just everybody pitching in and doing things that they needed to do to help him get better.
It's called love and unconditional love. So some people are lucky enough to find that in a lifetime and some aren't. And some people are lucky enough to see that being tested, and it could go either way. But during this time, I realized how much I loved him, and better or worse, you know, walking, no walking, bowel bladder, I love him and I'll be here for him. From the lady who identified that he fell out of the sky, to the ambulance driver, to the helicopter pilot, to the surgeons, to the nurses, to the custodial staff at the hospital, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because without every single stepping stone and process that they go through, who knows what would have happened to Miles. So I want to say thank you. They are 100% grade A, top-notch professionals, and thank you.